Amid the silent anticipation, the focus shifted to a figure who had long cast a dark shadow over these proceedings, a court official notorious for his partiality. Known as Judge Samuel Greer, his reputation for favoring influential parties and dismissing dissenting voices was as infamous as the gavel he wielded. Clad in an impeccably tailored black robe, his presence exuded an unsettling mix of authority and arrogance. As he took his seat at the front, Judge Greer's eyes locked onto Karoline with a piercing scrutiny that sent a shiver through the room. His tone, when he finally spoke, carried a condescension that belied the solemnity of the setting. "Ms. Leavitt," he began, his voice dripping with barely concealed disdain, "your arguments, while impassioned, lack the rigorous substantiation required for this court." The remark was not merely a critique. It was a calculated dismissal, a prelude to a series of biased decisions that had troubled those who had followed his rulings over the years. The courtroom buzzed with an undercurrent of disquiet as Judge Greer's prejudice became evident. His gaze was not one of objective justice but of a personal vendetta, setting the stage for a confrontation that promised to test the very limits of Karoline's resolve. Without warning, Judge Greer pounded his gavel, his voice slicing through the charged silence of the courtroom. "After reviewing the evidence presented, I find that the claims brought forth by Ms. Leavitt lack sufficient merit," he declared, dismissing her detailed documentation with a cold finality that sent ripples of shock throughout the room. His words were laced with an unmistakable bias, a premeditated decision that ignored the substantive points Karoline had painstakingly prepared. As he continued, his tone shifted to one of patronizing reproach. "It is clear that Ms. Leavitt's assertions are more reflective of personal grievances than of credible legal challenges." The ruling, delivered in a matter-of-fact manner, was not merely a judicial decision. It was a public slight aimed directly at undermining her credibility. The courtroom erupted in a low, disbelieving murmur. Some onlookers exchanged glances of indignation, while others appeared resigned to the familiar display of partiality. For Karoline, this blatant act of bias struck a deep chord, a signal that the battle she was about to wage would not be fought on an even playing field, but on a field long tilted against her. In that charged moment, a storm of emotions surged within Karoline. Despite the sting of Judge Greer's dismissive words, she maintained a calm exterior. Internally, however, her heart pounded with a mix of indignation, sorrow, and a burning resolve. Her eyes, though steady in the public eye, flickered with the unspoken promise of retribution. She felt the weight of every slight, each biased remark cutting deeper than any physical blow. Yet, rather than allow the injustice to shake her foundation, Karoline silently vowed to fight back. In the quiet recesses of her mind, the memory of every personal sacrifice and every long night spent gathering evidence sharpened her determination. She knew that her credibility, though questioned now, would be restored by the strength of her truth. With a measured breath, Karoline composed herself, readying for the next move. Behind her calm exterior lay a fierce determination, a commitment to expose the bias that threatened to undermine not only her case but the very integrity of the justice system itself. Barely a moment passed after her silent vow of retribution when Judge Greer, with a dismissive wave of his hand, swiftly relegated Karoline's arguments to the background. In an almost rehearsed tone, he declared, "Ms. Leavitt, while your concerns are noted, they remain unsubstantiated by the legal standards required by this court." His words, delivered without pause, effectively silenced any further discussion of her claims. Her detailed evidence and painstakingly gathered documentation were summarily dismissed as mere distractions, irrelevant details that failed to meet his preconceived notions of credibility. The judge's ruling was not only an outright rejection of her points, but also a clear indication that any challenge from her was unwelcome in his courtroom. In that instant, the bias that had fueled his decision was laid bare for all to see. The room filled with a heavy sense of resignation as colleagues and onlookers exchanged glances of dismay, recognizing the injustice of the swift dismissal. Yet beneath the surface, Karoline's determination grew even stronger, her mind already racing through the next steps to prove that her claims were not only valid but the key to unmasking a deeper systemic fault. In the days following the courtroom session, Karoline immersed herself in meticulous research, determined to expose not just an isolated act of bias, but a recurring pattern that had plagued the judicial system. Late into the night, surrounded by stacks of case files, legal briefs, and confidential memos, she began to trace the threads connecting Judge Greer's past rulings. With each new document and faded court transcript she uncovered, a disconcerting picture emerged, a series of decisions where similar biases had skewed justice in favor of the influential few. Her investigation revealed unsettling consistencies, Cases involving high-profile defendants or powerful entities invariably received lenient treatment, while those like hers, challenging the status quo, were met with swift dismissal. Karoline's discovery was not merely a personal vindication, but a damning indictment of systemic injustice. Every piece of evidence she collected bolstered her resolve to fight back and laid the groundwork for a broader campaign against the entrenched bias that had long corrupted the halls of justice. As she compiled her findings into a comprehensive dossier, the magnitude of the issue became clear. This was not just about one biased official, it was a pattern of prejudice that demanded accountability. Determined to bring these truths to light, Karoline prepared herself for the next phase of her struggle, knowing that exposing this pattern would not only restore her credibility, but also spark a much-needed call for reform within the legal system. With the weight of systemic injustice pressing down on her, Karoline felt a fierce resolve ignite within. The damning pattern she had uncovered was not merely a collection of cold facts. It was a call to arms. Late nights of relentless research and the quiet fury of personal slights had coalesced into an unwavering determination. She sat at her cluttered desk, the comprehensive dossier spread out before her like a roadmap of corruption, and made a silent vow. She would not allow this injustice to persist unchecked. Every piece of evidence, every faded transcript of a biased ruling, reinforced her belief that the truth must prevail. In that resolute moment, Karoline committed to turning her findings into a weapon against the very system that had tried to silence her. Her eyes burned with determination as she prepared to rally her legal team and allies, knowing that exposing the entrenched bias would require not only courage but strategic brilliance. This was not just a battle for her own vindication, it was a stand for every individual who had been wronged by the scales of justice tipped by prejudice. With her heart steeled and her mission clear, Karoline set forth on the next phase of her journey, ready to fight for accountability and reform. Determined to solidify her case, Karoline embarked on a meticulous quest to gather incontrovertible proof that would expose Judge Greer's bias once and for all. Late into the night, in the quiet solitude of her home office, she scoured archived court records, internal memos, and obscure legal documents, seeking any trace of inconsistencies in his rulings. Each piece of evidence was scrutinized and cross-referenced, her fingers flying over the keyboard as she uncovered emails and communications that hinted at preferential treatment in past cases. With the help of a trusted team of legal experts and an intrepid investigative journalist, she began to assemble a formidable dossier. This collection of documents, witness testimonies, and statistical analyses was more than just evidence. It was a meticulously crafted narrative that revealed a systematic pattern of injustice. Every new discovery reinforced her resolve, transforming the frustration of past injustices into a strategic arsenal. Karoline knew that once this evidence was presented, it would not only challenge the biased decisions of the past, but also shine a glaring light on a flawed system in desperate need of reform. Word of Karoline's findings began to spread beyond her inner circle, and soon a diverse array of supporters rallied to her cause. Key figures, a seasoned legal analyst, a respected investigative journalist, and local community organizers stepped forward, offering their expertise and public platforms to amplify her message. In an intimate meeting held at a local community center, Karoline found herself surrounded by these allies, each bringing unique insights and resources. The legal analyst reviewed her dossier, confirming the discrepancies in Judge Greer's past rulings, while the journalist pledged to expose the bias through hard-hitting investigative pieces. Local organizers, having witnessed similar injustices in their neighborhoods, shared their personal stories of systemic discrimination and pledged grassroots support. This coalition of experts and everyday citizens not only validated Karoline's claims, but also broadened the movement, turning her personal battle into a collective fight for justice. United by a shared passion for transparency and reform, they began coordinating strategies for a public campaign aimed at holding the biased official accountable. Their united front sent a clear message. The fight against injustice was no longer a solitary struggle, but a robust, community-driven effort poised to challenge entrenched power. As the alliance of legal experts, investigative journalists, and community organizers grew louder, Karoline's story quickly captured national media attention. Headlines began to surface, questioning the integrity of Judge Greer and spotlighting the systemic issues that had allowed such bias to flourish. Major news networks and social media platforms erupted with discussions and debates, each airing personal testimonies and expert analyses that reinforced Karoline's findings. Televised interviews, live-streamed panel discussions, and viral posts on social media transformed her struggle into a symbol of resistance against injustice. Citizens from all walks of life rally behind her cause, sharing their own experiences of discrimination and biased rulings, while demanding transparency and reform. The powerful convergence of media coverage and public outcry underscored a growing consensus. The courtroom had become more than just a legal arena. It was now a battleground for societal change. This wave of public scrutiny not only bolstered Karoline's resolve but also pressured the judicial establishment to take a closer look at its own practices, setting the stage for the next dramatic phase of her fight for justice. Despite the surge of media attention and growing public support, the forces aligned with Judge Greer began to mount a coordinated counteroffensive. In the days following the media storm, covert efforts were made to suppress Karoline's revelations. Key witnesses who had agreed to testify about the official's bias started receiving veiled threats, and some were pressured to retract their statements. Behind closed doors, powerful figures in the judicial establishment convened to strategize ways to discredit Karoline's dossier. Legal motions were rapidly filed to quash her evidence, and procedural hurdles were introduced to delay her next court appearance. Even public relations campaigns were launched to cast doubt on the authenticity of the documents, aiming to portray her as an overzealous crusader rather than a champion of justice. These suppression attempts, though heavy-handed, only fueled Karoline's determination. Each setback served as a reminder of the entrenched power she was up against, and reinforced her resolve to fight not only for her own vindication but for every voice silenced by systemic bias. The battle was intensifying, and Karoline knew that navigating these treacherous waters would require even greater courage and resourcefulness. In the quiet aftermath of the suppression attempts, a heavy silence enveloped Karoline's inner circle. Late one evening, alone in her modest office cluttered with stacks of evidence and legal briefs, the weight of the battle began to bear down on her. The relentless pressure of hostile maneuvers, veiled threats against witnesses, and the systemic forces resisting change coalesced into an overwhelming sense of isolation. For a long moment, Karoline stared at the dossier spread out before her, a tangible record of her tireless efforts and sacrifices. The glow from her desk lamp flickered as doubts crept in. Had all her struggle been in vain? The enormity of the opposition seemed insurmountable, and the cost of truth appeared too high to bear. In that vulnerable moment, tears welled at her eyes, not out of weakness but from the profound burden of fighting an entrenched injustice. Yet even as despair threatened to swallow her, a quiet inner voice reminded her of every injustice she had witnessed and every person counting on her courage. The memory of those who had suffered under systemic bias and the faces of her supportive allies reignited a spark within her, one that whispered, "You must stand up again." Gathering her resolve, Karoline wiped away her tears and closed the dossier with deliberate finality. The moment of despair had been a painful, necessary pause, a reminder that the road to justice is often paved with both setbacks and small, personal victories. With renewed determination, she prepared to rally her team once more, ready to transform this darkness into the fuel for her next bold step in the fight for truth. Just when the shadows of despair seemed most impenetrable, a sudden glimmer of insight sparked a breakthrough. As Karoline re-examined a seemingly routine file, a record that had previously slipped under the radar, she noticed a discrepancy in the timestamps and financial figures that connected Judge Greer to a covert meeting with a prominent lobbyist. The anomaly was subtle, almost buried in bureaucratic red tape, but its implications were profound. Heart-pounding, she retraced the document's origins, cross-referencing it with archived emails and internal memos. The pieces began to align. This overlooked detail revealed a direct link between the biased decisions and an undisclosed financial incentive. Her eyes widened with a mix of disbelief and exhilaration as the evidence took on a clear, damning shape. Realizing the magnitude of this discovery, Karoline immediately contacted her investigative journalist ally, who had been on standby, waiting for a signal. Together, they confirmed the validity of the data through independent sources. The breakthrough not only filled a critical gap in her dossier, but also provided the missing piece needed to decisively challenge Judge Greer's long-standing bias. This newfound evidence was the turning point Karoline had been striving for, a beacon of hope that reinvigorated her mission. It bolstered her resolve, turning the tide of the battle and setting the stage for a dramatic comeback that would soon shake the very foundations of the corrupt judicial system. Armed with the breakthrough evidence, Karoline convened an urgent meeting with her core team in a discreet, secure location. Under the soft glow of a single desk lamp in a small, nondescript conference room, she spread out the newly discovered documents and laid out her vision for the next move. Every detail was meticulously planned: the timing of the next court hearing, the media strategy to expose the scandal, and the coordinated efforts to safeguard the integrity of her witnesses. Her legal team brainstormed arguments that would seamlessly incorporate the fresh evidence, while her investigative journalist ally prepared an exclusive exposé to be released simultaneously with the courtroom proceedings. Karoline outlined a strategy with precision, her voice calm yet resolute. "This is our moment," she declared. "We're not just fighting for a personal victory. This is about dismantling a system that has long operated in the shadows. We will present the evidence in such a way that it leaves no room for doubt." Every team member contributed ideas, refining the plan to ensure that each step would expose the corruption at its core. The atmosphere in the room shifted from one of cautious optimism to determined resolve. With a strategic comeback meticulously mapped out, Karoline and her allies were ready to challenge the biased establishment and force a reckoning that would echo far beyond the walls of the courtroom. The day of the next hearing dawned with an undercurrent of palpable tension. As the courtroom reconvened, all eyes were fixed on Karoline. With a quiet determination that belied the storm raging within her, she stepped forward at the precise moment when Judge Greer prepared to dismiss her case once more. Without waiting for permission, Karoline laid out the breakthrough evidence on the witness table, a meticulously organized portfolio of documents, emails, and financial records that directly implicated the judge in clandestine dealings. The presentation was flawless. Each document was introduced with a brief explanation, seamlessly woven into a narrative that exposed the extent of systemic corruption. The courtroom erupted in a collective gasp. Even Judge Greer's steely facade faltered as he scanned the incontrovertible proof laid bare before him. The tension in the room was electric. Spectators leaned forward, legal teams exchanged astonished glances, and the previously dismissive atmosphere gave way to a stunned silence. In that charged moment, Karoline's voice rang out, clear and unwavering. "Your Honor, I present to you the evidence that unequivocally ties these biased rulings to financial incentives and undisclosed alliances. This is the truth that has been obscured for far too long." Her comeback was not merely a legal maneuver. It was a resounding declaration that the pursuit of justice would not be derailed by prejudice or intimidation. The shocking revelation left no room for doubt, compelling even the staunchest skeptics in the courtroom to confront the undeniable reality of systemic injustice. For the first time in the proceedings, the stoic facade of Judge Greer began to crumble under the weight of Karoline's relentless comeback. As she methodically laid out the evidence, his eyes widened in disbelief. Each document seemed to peel back the layers of his carefully constructed veneer. His normally unflappable demeanor gave way to visible signs of distress, a slight tremor in his hand as he gripped the bench, a tightening around his eyes, and a hesitant shift in his posture. The courtroom watched in rapt silence, as the judge's expression transformed from one of authoritative certainty to one of raw vulnerability and internal conflict. The once commanding figure now appeared unsettled, caught between the overwhelming force of undeniable proof and the long-standing habits of bias that had defined his career. In that charged moment, every attendee felt that the scales of justice were teetering, as the judge's visible reaction signaled that even he could no longer ignore the irrefutable truth Karoline had presented. The silence shattered in an instant. As Judge Greer's face betrayed his inner conflict, the courtroom erupted into chaos. Whispers turned into murmurs, then into outright exclamations of disbelief and outrage. Jurors exchanged fervent glances while spectators and reporters clutched their devices, recording every moment. The tension reached a fever pitch as several attendees stood, their voices rising in a spontaneous outpouring of support for Karoline. Some legal professionals in the gallery shook their heads in disapproval of the long-held bias, while others openly challenged the notion that evidence could be so blatantly dismissed. The air was thick with the sound of shuffling feet, the rustle of papers, and the clamor of impassioned voices, all converging into a turbulent symphony of collective outrage. Amidst the uproar, even members of the prosecution could be seen exchanging uneasy looks, their confidence waning in the face of the undeniable proof. Every reaction in the room underscored the seismic shift taking place, a moment when the foundations of the courtroom were being shaken by the raw, public demand for justice. In the midst of the uproar, a surprising turn of events unfolded that shifted the courtroom dynamics even further. As the shock of the revelation spread, an influential figure, once considered an ardent ally of Judge Greer, stepped forward unexpectedly. A respected senior attorney, known for his previous close ties with the establishment, rose from the gallery to speak. His voice, calm and authoritative, resonated through the tumultuous room. "I have witnessed too many injustices in this system," he declared, his tone measured yet impassioned. Today, the evidence presented by Ms. Leavitt compels us all to reevaluate our commitments to fairness and transparency. His testimony was bolstered by corroborative documents he had secretly gathered over the years, files that confirmed the pattern of bias and preferential treatment that had plagued Judge Greer's court. This unexpected support sent ripples through the courtroom. Other legal insiders, previously hesitant to challenge the status quo, began voicing their agreement. A junior prosecutor, emboldened by the senior attorney's words, stood up to echo the sentiments, stating, "Justice must be blind, but today it has been blinded by partiality." I stand with Ms. Leavitt. The surge of support from these unexpected allies not only lent additional credibility to Karoline's case, but also signaled a potential shift in the broader legal community. Their courageous declarations amplified the call for accountability, reinforcing the notion that the pursuit of truth and justice transcends old loyalties and entrenched power structures. The combined force of overwhelming evidence and the courageous outcry from unexpected allies proved too potent for the biased establishment to ignore. In a moment that seemed to suspend time, the judge slowly cleared his throat and, with an air of reluctant acknowledgement, addressed the courtroom. His voice, initially tentative, grew firmer with each word as he declared, "In light of the incontrovertible evidence and the public interest in upholding justice, I hereby reverse my previous ruling." A wave of relief and jubilation swept through the room as spectators erupted in applause and murmurs of approval. Legal professionals, jurors, and citizens alike recognized that the scales of justice were finally being balanced. The reversal was more than just a legal maneuver. It was a powerful public vindication of Karoline's relentless pursuit of truth. For Karoline, the moment was both a personal triumph and a symbolic victory against systemic bias. As the judge formally documented the new decision, the courtroom buzzed with renewed energy and hope. The reversal not only restored faith in the judicial process but also sent a resounding message that even the most entrenched prejudices can be dismantled by perseverance, integrity, and the courage to stand up for what is right. As the echoes of the reversal began to subside, a cautious calm fell over the courtroom, giving way to an undercurrent of anticipation for what lay ahead. Karoline, standing amidst the lingering applause and approving murmurs, felt a mix of triumph and sober determination. She knew that while today's victory had dismantled a critical pillar of bias, it was only a beginning, a signal flare in the long fight for systemic reform. In the aftermath, conversations buzzed with both celebration and strategic planning. Legal experts and reform advocates discussed how today's events could serve as a precedent, while grassroots supporters planned rallies and community forums to keep the momentum alive. In quiet corners, former adversaries exchanged uneasy glances, aware that their tactics would now be scrutinized under a more vigilant public eye. Karoline herself, now more than ever, embraced the role of a catalyst for change. With her dossier of evidence and a newfound network of allies, she pledged to continue pushing for accountability and transparency, not only in Judge Greer's courtroom but throughout the entire judicial system. This victory was a powerful reminder that no institution was above scrutiny, and every act of bias could spark a revolution when met with unwavering courage. As the day ended, the subdued clatter of chairs and whispered conversations outside the courtroom testified to an emerging collective resolve. The battle had been hard-fought, but its conclusion marked only the opening chapter of a larger struggle, a struggle where every challenge would be met with informed resistance, relentless advocacy, and a commitment to justice that would echo far beyond the confines of this one case.